week's clash between taxi and e-hailing drivers at Maponya Mall, leading to the death of a driver and severely injuring others, has focused a spotlight on the taxi industry's alleged targeting of e-hailing drivers. Previously, taxi operators have taken to the streets to protest against private vehicle services, arguing that they take away from their income. Also, there is heightened concern over law enforcement's ability to police the taxi industry, including lawlessness on the roads, vigilantism and disorderly public conduct. But why does this issue still persist? Is it due to policing training capacity or a lack of will? Well, let's get some perspective now from Willem Els from the Institute for Security Studies. Mr. Els, thank you for your time and for joining us this morning. So from a security perspective, what systemic factors do you think contribute to this recurring violence that we see with traditional taxis and now with e-hailing services? How does the existing regulatory framework facilitate or even just hinder effective policing of the taxi industry?
Good morning to you, Kotlego. Yes, you know, the problem that we are sitting with has been with us for a very long time. For a very long time, the taxi industry has been dominating basically law enforcement. They were allowed to become a law unto themselves in the roads, and that mainly due to lack of political will, but also due to lack of policies and the enforcement of the law. So the rule of law has really been suffering when it comes to the taxi industry, and they became stronger and stronger to such an extent that now they became a mafia type organization that is actually dictating their mafia style arrangements on the public. So you've got the tail actually wagging the dog at the moment.
And speaking of that mafia style and them being a law unto themselves, what do you think are the primary challenges that law enforcement agencies face, particularly in maintaining law and order, but also just ensuring compliance within this highly competitive and sometimes volatile taxi sector?
Well, in the first place, it starts with the rule of law. So we have to enforce, and we believe, all of us believe in the rule of law. And the rule of law is supposed to be paramount. And then it starts with your political will. So you have to have political will, because many of these associations, many of these syndicates within the associations, they are being protected by politicians. They are being protected by politicians with interest, as well as in the judiciary, as well as in the policing sector. So they have basically compromised the whole law enforcement establishment. And the problem with that is now that these senior officers, and also from the most junior officer taking a bribe from them to the most senior one protecting them, they are actually enablers of this status quo that is currently a challenge with us. So if we want to really address it, it has to start with the political will, then the policies and the legislation must be updated in order to enforce the rule of law, and also to make it more conducive for everybody to live. And then the regulation of these industries must be strictly adhered to. You cannot have criminals and mafia-style groups actually forcing their will on law enforcement and on government. Like, for instance, you know, in my area that I live, they stop the vehicles where even parents are transporting their children to school, and they force the children out of the vehicles into the taxis because they say that the parents are now eating their money. And that is just exactly what we do not need in South Africa, because that is really not supporting the rule of law.
So staying on the ability of law enforcement agencies, do you think there's a resource allocation, a jurisdictional overlap impact that prohibits the ability of police to proactively manage the taxi industry and its conflicts?
I think it's a mixture of both. It starts with of course, your capacity. We do not have sufficient feet on the ground and also equipment on the ground in order to enforce the legislations and the bylaws. And secondly, you know, our biggest challenge in South Africa is the elephant in the room, and that is corruption. As long as you have corrupted officials, or what we call state-embedded actors, protecting these people and also eating from them, it's going to maintain the status quo at the expense of the general public in South Africa.
And do you think a lack of just standardized licensing, oversight and accountability, do you think that contributes to violence?
I think if we can put that in place and we can maintain it, then it should bring down the criminality there. But you know, it's a bigger problem than just that. We have to go and sit down and we have to relook our strategy, because this has been with us now for 30 plus years. We have to break that culture that developed where, you know, your syndicates within your taxi organizations, they register security guards, security companies, and then they have access to firearms, and they become mafia-style groups, as I mentioned, and they are enforcing their will, not only on the public, but also on law enforcement and on the government.
Do you think it's attainable for us to get to a point where we break that culture and for the taxi industry not to be a law unto itself, but really have it working with many of the other services that exist within the same spectrum?
Yeah, you know, if you look at other places in the world, for instance, at some stage, the city of New York struggled also with extreme lawlessness. And they implemented a strategy, it's called the broken window syndrome that they addressed. So if you start with every smallest, all the smallest of smallest infringement, and you come hard on them and you enforce that, it will trickle up, and it will eventually it will stop the more serious crimes. And that is where it starts, and that is what the rule of law is all about. The rule of law needs to be in the hand of the government and law enforcement, not in the hands of your vigilante groups.
How do you think socioeconomic inequalities, I mean, you mentioned political patronage that influences just this persistence of taxi industry violence and the perceived impunity of offenders? I mean, what role do you think community perceptions and trust in the law enforcement plays in either mitigating or exacerbating these conflicts?
That is one of our biggest challenges. You know, if you look at the trust, the public trust in the police, it went down from 26, now it's just above 20% of the people that actually trust the police to be able to do their work and to protect them. And that is not a very good situation to be in, because who do the public have to go to now? So if the police cannot protect them, the police is actually failing in their duty, and government is failing, because at the end of the day, your law enforcement or your rule of law pillar of your functional state is crumbling. And then what the problem is, your public start to take the law into their own hands, and that lead to the violence that we saw over the past week.
So any proactive security measures then that could be implemented to prevent incidences like we saw at Maponya Mall?
Yeah, I think, you know, there are various strategies that the police can implement. They can flood the area with of course, with police officers, more visible policing, with more resources. But also they have to start with intelligence, and they have to start to get behind the syndicates working, and they need to where they break the law, they need to be arrested, and they need to be brought to court. And that is how you're going to break the neck of this whole thing.
And I suppose some multi-stakeholder collaboration is also quite important in order for us to enhance some of these strategies.
Of course, you know, in the recent past, we saw that government started with this strategy of including the municipal police, but also your private sector, your private companies, etc. And they formed a joint force against the crime. And that is where we saw most of our successes over the past year or two. So I think that is something to build on, where they have to take hands and they have to pool resources in order to curb this. But of course, it will always have to be under the leadership and the guidance of the police as the custodians of this pillar in the Constitution.
And do you think the taxi industry will remain resistant to some of these changes? And if they are, what then needs to be done in order for there just to be harmony, especially for those that are in the firing line? We saw some of the commuters, another operator also being shot in the incident that happened at Maponya Mall. How far can this resistance be pushed?
Yeah, at the end of the day, you know, I don't think it's negotiable that they can dictate, because that is not healthy for the rule of law. So what will happen is there need to be strong political, I said, and there need to be decisive action. If there's decisive action, there will be resistance from, of course, the criminals that are, or the criminal elements that are within them. With that, we don't say all of them are criminals. We just qualify that. And then after the initial resistance and the strategy of the police, when it is rolled out, eventually it is persistently applied, and also they can curb the corruption within their own ranks, if we're on the right track.
Should there be a multidisciplinary intervention amongst government departments themselves? I mean, you mentioned earlier that you find a lot of these taxi associations registering security companies where they're able to attain guns. And we saw earlier in the week that the MEC of Transport was also there in trying to negotiate with the community in getting the taxi industry to then operate and Maponya Mall to also open. Should there be some kind of overlaps between these departments in ensuring that we don't find such criminal elements within the transport system, because people are able to register companies that would then act as security companies and have access to firearms?
Yeah, you know, in your crime prevention environment, and that is where we are talking about now, you have a scenario where we call it, it is also by some scholars, it was called the impossible mandate that has been given to the police to do crime prevention, because the police do not have control over all your socioeconomic and other factors. And that is why you just mentioned is very important. There need to be a holistic approach to your crime prevention strategy, where all the different role players, that is all your different departments, private sector, and all the role players and the community as well, must get together, and they must work together on the crime prevention strategy and the implementation of that. And if they stand together and they develop that and they start to enforce it, of course, then the criminals will have to step aside.
All right. Willem Els, thank you so much for your time. There certainly needs a multi-pronged approach in ensuring that we have these industries that are working for the better interests of the people in South Africa. Thank you for your time and your insights this morning.